And we are now live, Senators.
Thank you very much, Alex. Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Vermont State Senate Committee on Institutions. Today is Tuesday, March 15th, 2022. I'm Joe Benning, the chair of the committee from Caledonia County. We have with us in the committee room Senator Corey Parent from Franklin County, Senator Dick McCormick from Windsor County, and on the screen with us, Senator Russ Ingalls from Essex Orleans and Senator Dick Mazza from Colchester Grand Isle. Just for the benefit of the folks on YouTube, David, as I introduce you in a moment, but the bottom line is that whenever we're having a conversation in the committee room, it's been traditional where we all know each other, we know each other's language, et cetera, but there's an audience out there that we don't know anything about. So I try to keep the conversation at a level where virtually everybody can understand what's happening. Should you say something that red flags for me, a piece of terminology that may not be familiar to our audience, I may interrupt you, not to be rude, just to explain what X, Y, or Z happens to be. So the committee's conversation this afternoon is somewhat varied, but we're going to start off with a piece of the governor's recommended capital budget adjustment dealing with the State House maintenance of interior historic finishes. And we are honored to have with us the state curator for the Department of Buildings and General Services, David Sheets. David, when you begin, I'd also like to have you give a brief biography of who you are and how you fit into the government process so our audience knows all about you. Welcome.
Happily. Thank you, Senators. I have been state curator and the first, and I hope not the only, to serve in that capacity since 1986. And prior to that, I was hired in 1979 to serve as a research assistant on a project that the Arts Council funded with a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts, looking at the State House with new eyes at that time, as though the building might be a museum. And there were three recommendations from that process that went to the legislature at that time. One was to hire a curator. The second was to found a friends organization to raise private money. And the third was to restore the building to whatever period experts might consider to be the right period. And the first two started in the early 1980s, right after that report was issued. The curator took a little longer because there was a disagreement with the Sergeant at Arms at the time, who was a little territorial. So once that Sergeant at Arms was gone, the Department of Buildings and General Services hired me as the first curator of state buildings. So my domain actually is all historic buildings that the state of Vermont owns that are administered by the Department of Buildings. And yet the State House has always been between 80 and 99% of what I do.
So for introductory purposes, can you just tell us what the curator is?
So the curator is a person who, generally speaking, is the principal interpreter of a museum. So interpretation, which, as I think you know from our major conversations the last couple of years, interpretation of the State House is part of what we're doing. In other words, interpreting it to a visiting public. The visiting public has always come to this building, but it has not always acknowledged that the building was more than the workplace of the legislature, the governor, and even for a time, the judicial branch of state government. And so we're revisiting all of that now with our interpretive plan, which is in the works, that this committee helped us with by suggesting that we get into that, as well as helping us to fund a consultant who has been working with us. And we're hoping to reveal the new interpretive plan for the State House in July of this year. So that process, we're right in the middle of it. We're going to be bringing it to the Legislative Advisory Committee on the State House at some point in the spring. And our hope is that it will be a done deal, signed off on by July. And then we enter a whole new era of looking at the building with that plan as our guide for new storytelling in the State House. Because the storytelling that the State House has always had and will continue to have is simply the story of the building itself. And that story has been our mantra from the outset. But in recent years, a number of people have hoped that we would go a little further. And yet we want to stay connected to that central narrative, and that is still going to be the central narrative of the building, because that's what people are here to see. They're here to appreciate the State House and its long history, the history that goes back to 2 previous state houses as well. So the restoration of the State House began back in the 80s with the governor's office, the very first room, major chamber in the building to be fully restored. And that was in part because that was the one room in the building that the Sergeant at Arms did not have control over. And the chair of the Friends of the State House was Barbara Snelling, the wife at that time of the sitting governor, Richard Snelling. And so we started with that room before I was ever curator, but I was very much invested in the project from 1979 onward. And we hired an architect, John Mesick of Mesick, Cohen, Wilson, and Baker, one of the nation's preeminent restoration firms based in Albany, New York. And they worked with us to study the photographs, all of the evidence of what the State House looked like back at the time that it was first built. And we were looking at it. Here's an old photograph of the governor's office, printed in an old newspaper article from the 80s. And from that photograph, which I brought an old photograph showing what the governor's office looked like before it was restored. And this watercolor, which I still have in my collection, was created so that visitors and particularly donors would know what the goal was. So this is what the governor's office was proposed to look like. And by 1985, Richard Snelling actually ended his tenure. He would come back eventually to serve one more term, or not quite a term, but he did come back. But in between, Madeline Kunin was elected governor, and she actually was the very first person to enjoy the newly restored governor's office. And she was the first governor that I served as curator. So this committee is the very committee that worked very hard. Back then it was Bob Gannett, who was the chair, and we worked with the state. Eventually, that room was entirely funded by the Friends because it was anticipated that that would be a way to show people what the State House could look like when restored. And there were a lot of misgivings back then. It's kind of hard to remember that, but there were not a lot of people who were on fire with a desire to restore the State House. But the plan that MISIC developed basically guided us for the next 2 decades, restoring the State House little by little. The only big project was in 1995, which Dick was just talking about, when the Senate was a little freaked out by what had happened to the House chamber, in particular their carpet, and wanted us to pay attention to other parts of the State House in the years that followed. So it opened the door to a wonderful opportunity. The original plan was only to do the major chambers. There had been no ambition to come down to the first floor and actively restore these rooms, all of which had drop ceilings that cut off the windows and 1970s lighting that had been installed in a renovation of the early 70s.
So,
which is when the
we need to stop for just a moment.
Sure.
Speaking of doors, and before you leave the governor's office, a rumor that I had always heard when I was first introduced to the building was there is a bathroom in the far corner, but it used to go all the way through into the Supreme Court's library. And that if a governor was sitting in his office and heard someone coming down the hall that he didn't want to speak to, he would scoot out that door into the library and get lost to avoid that conversation. Is there any truth to that rumor?
The restroom, so the restroom that you're talking about, you mean?
Yes.
Was created in 1968 to 71. So there was a major renovation of the State House in the late 60s and early 70s. It was finished in 1971. And that renovation was really the first major renovation of the building since it was built virtually. And it introduced new systems, HVAC systems. You've been talking a lot about our HVAC system for the last several years. That was installed as part of that renovation, and the first air conditioning came into the State House as well. By then, the State Library that had been where the Cedar Creek room is was long gone. It moved out in 1888. So 1888 is the year that the following project decided to restore the Cedar Creek room to that 1880s period. It having lost most of the extravagance that is up there today again. But that is the second means of egress for the governor and has been since 1971. We call it the second means of egress, but it is, as you're alluding, Senator, it is definitely a place where the governor can make a quick escape or can go out undetected, possibly by others who are at the main entrance of his office. But it's only been since 1971. They have tried to update that room, and it is the sole room in the State House that I'm trying to preserve to the 1970s, which I spent most of my time in the 80s and 90s trying to get rid of the 70s in this building. And that's the one room where I want to stay 70s because that's when it was created. So it tells the story.
I often give tours, and I do. I can usually get a good little chuckle from people when I tell them the story about the governor trying to get out of the room.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So that 70s renovation was done rather poorly, and it was the backlash to that, to what they had done to the State House, that created momentum for restoring the building in the decades that followed. And today we have a fairly fully restored building, but it's now getting old, meaning the governor's office is now almost coming up on 40 years with the same carpet, the same drapes, and so on. So the ephemeral parts of the restoration are the parts that we're trying to create a cycle of replacement and repair. We've tried repair successfully, meaning I have extra carpet in my storage area that's left over from the restoration of some of these chambers. So we've managed to patch the rugs where they get a little threadbare, such as the threshold of the Cedar Creek room was looking pretty bad a couple years ago. We patched in a piece of that rug and successfully shaved it down a little bit so that it wouldn't look strange with the much more weary carpet. And that's worked for a time, but now we're hoping to get into a cycle of every few years doing this room, doing that room, so that we don't come to a point where the whole State House has to be restored again. Instead, keeping up with that cycle of wear and tear. The pandemic, of course, bought us a couple years of not so much wear and tear for a change, but I think you are all too aware of the large audience of visitors. Over 150,000 people visit the State House per year, and that's not including the people who simply come to the State House for the business of a typical legislative session.
I'm going to have to excuse myself.
Sure.
This is the schedule of events.
You trust me with that?
I think I have to.
Yeah,
I will be back, however.
Very good. Yeah.
David, let me say, even though I fought you on the Senate carpet, you won.
I don't remember that.
Oh,
actually.
well, it was
I mean, I
Vince.
remember the fight.
No, it
I
was,
don't remember you, Dick.
it was Vince who fought you. and
Yes,
Holly
yes,
Miller.
that's.
But I know I was on there, so, but I was the deciding vote. You won when I caved. That's. Well, I did it.
This thank you is long overdue.
I did it for, no, because I did it for a little late.
Oh, okay, all right.
But one gets used to it.
Sure.
It would look very strange for that rug now to not be there. I don't think to fully appreciate what we all pulled off,
Sure.
and in particular you, but under your leadership, is how badly messed up the State House was when that project started.
Yes,
Big, stupid plastic globes
yes,
for the lights in the main
Yes.
hall. And as you mentioned, the drop ceilings.
the drop ceilings.
Yeah, this was.
It was a project, and yet I hasten to add, the nation's state houses in general were restored in the decades when we were doing the same. So there was definitely a movement in historic preservation to begin to appreciate these buildings. In many cases, behemoth buildings. In our case, a much smaller, more intimate state house than what most states enjoy. And a building that didn't happily have been conserved to a certain extent, that we have to this day, 90% of the original furniture is still here. And the members themselves are using the original chairs and desks in both chambers, unheard of in the 21st century. And literally our two chambers are the oldest in the country that are in their original condition and still actively used for the same purpose almost 170 years later. So it's that is what makes this place special. That's kind of a Vermont ethic, in my opinion. If you look at the State House as the biggest and grandest of a town, of a state filled with town halls, many of which are also historic and still used for their original purposes. It's just kind of like the big town hall above all the other town halls. And that's kind of a central narrative of our interpretive plan that we're working on right now. How democracy takes place, how it renders itself in different ways in a building like this with the legislature, the governor, and even at times the Supreme Court interacting, but also how town meeting plays out as direct democracy in those town halls. Kind of a network of democratic oriented buildings throughout the state. And that's the story that we want to evoke here.
Well, the chair mentioned how he gets a laugh when he's giving people a tour by talking about the governor's estate.
Yes, right.
I often get, I don't know if it's a laugh, but there's a portrait of the state Supreme Court outside
Right.
what is now, I guess it was the lounge, and now it's a committee room, but the old Supreme Court chamber.
Right.
And I will just say to particular kids, I said, okay, just imagine this. You've been condemned to die, and these are the guys hearing your appeal. Because they look so
A little sober.
brutally sober.
Yes. People tended to look sober back then.
Yeah, but none of those had the facial hair to go with
Oh,
it.
totally,
You know?
totally. Oh, no, absolutely. Well, and that was, of course, at a time when the men were pretty much exclusively in charge, right?
Yeah.
So part of what the storytelling is that we're developing this year is how to tell the story that connects all Vermonters to this building. And you know this because you personally have been a member of our curatorial task force, which is the group that started these conversations. And I'm very grateful for your participation.
Well, thanks for that. It's been fascinating work, you know. Do you want to talk about that?
I think I've said it, but I'm very open to questions. It'll be done in July, and we'll have all of the storytelling kind of developed by then a little bit. And the means of executing it, I think, is part of what we're still unsure of. Meaning, as I said, all of the stories need to be related to the State House in some way, and yet connecting everyone in the state to the building in some way or another. And we'll be unveiling a portrait coming up, we hope at the end of April. We've had to push it off because of COVID. But our hope is that we'll have an in-person unveiling of this brand new gigantic portrait of Alexander Twilight, who is going to hang where Admiral Charles Clark currently hangs. Admiral Clark will move up to the Cedar Creek room, where there is a blank wall right now awaiting him.
Wow, big enough for that?
Big enough for him, yeah. And the new portrait, which is all finished but not quite framed yet, will take its place. And you may have noticed next time you're in the lobby, take a look at the steam screens under the portraits, and you'll see the story of Alexander Twilight is already there, as well as the stories of the three state houses on the other side of the lobby, which we just installed those as part of of that effort.
Going forward with the broadening of perspective in the state house,
Yes.
who are honored. When I taught history, I would often say, I'd remind students of the Sherlock Holmes story, The Hound of the Baskervilles.
Yeah.
And of course, most of them hadn't read it, so I have to tell them that basically he solves the mystery by what doesn't happen, that the dog didn't bark. So he knows the murderer did not come from the outside. It must have been an inside job.
Yeah.
And I said, what the absence of a clue can be information,
Sure.
okay? And I say, if you're wondering where the women are in this story, why it's so heavily male and heavily white, it's because that's the way they were doing it. That is important information.
Sure.
The absence of people of color in this story is important information. The curatorial committee has gone a little further than that and said, yeah, but they were there. Maybe they weren't running things, but they were there.
Right.
So maybe we shouldn't just be looking at the dead white guys who ran things.
Exactly.
We need to look at these other people who did things as well.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
and in some cases, we don't know who they were.
Right.
So we might not be having individual portraits so much as.
That's exactly right. I think that's another outcome in the plan, is that we're trying to move the State House a little bit away from the honorific, from insisting that everyone on the walls of the building is somehow heroic, rather than mere Vermonters, mere Vermonters that have done their job in great ways in many cases. Some on the walls may not have done such a great job, but it's part of the truth of history that we have the opportunity to say what their stories are. And that's what we're going to try to do.
Yeah.
Are there any questions?
Committee? Zoomers?
Zoomers? No?
Okay, thank you, David.
My pleasure, absolutely. We're very grateful to this committee for all of your steadfast support over the decade
Thanks,
that I've been around. So thank you. Sure.
And we're ready to hear from Michael Snyder.
I am here.
Okay, take the chair if you will. We're on the governor's recommended for the capital budget, and
Give him more than what he wants. Doesn't make any difference.
I think we need more for planning, Senator Mazza.
Well, no, I'll give him anything, but not planning. I'm sorry. That's it.
We've completed all our plans and we're moving towards implementation.
That will make Senator Mazza very happy.
Always trust Michael Snyder. He tells it like it is.
Thank you, sir.
Talk to us.
So for the record, Michael Snyder, Commissioner for Parks and Recreation, along with State Parks Director Nate McKean and Parks Projects Manager Frank Spalding on via Zoom. Thanks for joining me, gentlemen.
Before you go on, in deference to our chair, he always advises avoid jargon.
Yes.
Insider.
Understood. I've heard that taken to heart, so correct me if I fall on that. I understand we're here today by your request to talk about I think it's the rustic cabin program, the unspent funds capital that was a unique appropriation in, I think it was 2019. We sometimes, remember the calendar year and the appropriation year sometimes are a little confusing, but this is it's more than 2 years old money that was a line item in our capital appropriation. Governor Scott had proposed creating new cabins, which everyone seems in favor of the new cabins because they are desired, they have a better rate of return, etc. But this was special in that he asked us to see if we could work with the Career Tech Ed Centers for students in the trade programs to be engaged in building the cabins. So we had $800,000 appropriated for a special rustic cabin program through the Career Tech Ed Centers, which we began, and everyone was very excited about it. It just makes a lot of sense. Immediately ran into, well, the reality is that they're not a contractor, and they work on a very limited schedule, and so it was much slower, I think, than we anticipated. No fault of anyone's, just a realization.
2 hours a day.
That's right. They're limited.
These are high school
kids in the Career Tech Ed Centers.
What I typically get just for the committees are up in St. Albans, where we have this, they're restoring like the soup kitchens building, but it's a 2-year project, which would take a normal contract maybe 3 months. But it gets done, labor's effectively free because they're educating the kids as they're doing it.
Right, and that's the upside, is you give this wonderful opportunity, and I love this idea that it's these kids learning in the trades as they contribute to the fabulous Vermont park system, and that's a point of pride for them and their communities, I would hope, et cetera. So great program, really exciting, but with some challenges. And then you layer onto those sort of practical realities. The COVID hit and schools were shut down, and so really we fell way behind. So we also along the way realized during that our cabin design for the rustic cabins is not exactly in sync with building the type of building, the type of construction these kids are working and being taught. And so it's a bit of a mismatch that way. And because of that, we have set about to create a new design that would be better suited to the construction types that they learn about and be a better fit. And we are in the process of creating that new design. And so that leaves us, as we explained in the House Committee, just we have an outstanding balance of $775,000. We've spent some, but it's just really kind of been slow. Senator Parent, sir.
How many cabins do we build for that?
How many total? Or so maybe guys, I'm sorry, it's not off the top of my head. When we up to about 40 some cabins, Nate, Frank, is that what we have in the system?
I'll get the exact number, but I think we have closer to 60.
Okay.
And how many will the 700,000 build?
And so they're about 40 to 60,000 per, and the range there is, it's a simple design. You'd think it would be looked better.
Oh, but
Frank can explain better. It's really about the site work, really
Yeah.
varies. And then you think about Burton Island, what we had to do to fit those cabins in out there. So much, that can be
we'll
a
just need the
range.
equipment out there.
And all of it, right. So, and now we're seeing spikes in
Rolling
materials,
into woods out.
workforce, no comment. So that's the basics on the cabins, and so where we land is we have the sites. We tend to look in throughout the system for underperforming tent sites where they're just not very popular. Convert those as designated to go to a cabin and then up the visitation rate. We have that all scoped out throughout the state, where we want to build cabins, for what purpose. We have the Stafford Center in the Rutland School. They actually added a component which was to actually mill logs and start with the milling process and create the timbers, which has been an additive kind of thing. But the upshot is we have this fund balance. You're right to ask, boy, it's a couple years old. How are we going to spend that money? And we really want to stick with trying this program. But the fact is, it's been slow, and we, in the House, they said, well, maybe instead of, they were inclined to just pull all the money back. And then they said, well, given the importance of this program, perhaps we would consider maybe 250,000, build fewer cabins with the students, and then use the other 500,000 for other infrastructure work. And we understand that reasoning. Are grateful that they don't want to just pull the plug on the really great student program, but are willing to change up our approach, still get maybe fewer cabins done with the students, but put the rest of it out the door into other infrastructure needs and get the money spent. Good afternoon, Senator Bennett.
Good afternoon, Commissioner. My apologies for being late.
Not at all.
And I'm returning your committee.
Well, I didn't take you along with Vince.
Must be Vince fun.
If I may say so, Mr. Chairman, you look disgruntled.
Only because I think that said prosecutor could have dismissed this a long time ago and we'd have been done, but that's not the case.
Shall I repeat everything I said for the chair's benefit?
Nah,
Could you return my schedule to me, Dick?
Yeah.
we're gonna build more cabins on Woods Island and Knights Island and Burton Island. That's the goal.
Well, that's the upshot. The only question then remains is what does the Senate Committee on Institutions get for discount for renting the?
Well, I'll pass that one.
I'd pay full price if I could get one. Every time I've looked at like Lake Carmi or any of the other places, they're always booked out quite a
Gotta be the
quite a bit of time.
weekdays. Gotta do the weekdays.
Yeah, midweek is a good bet. Also, stay on it. Nate would tell you, stay on it. We have cancellations and then you jump in. It's 11 months in advance, right?
Yeah.
And it's very popular and a really high, occupancy rate. So we're thrilled with that, but don't give up. People get bonus, reservations all the time.
Nate, I don't know if you knew, but I grew up in St. Albans, but I spent every weekend in the summers at Woods Island on that reef there. My parents on a little boat, so I love Woods Island.
Yeah.
I've been to every square inch of it. When you used to have the map, I used to stop at Burton Island, get the little map of the island, and I would take it as a kid and
It's
up
terrific.
and down. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Wow.
His parents were smart enough to reserve well in advance, though.
No, we didn't. We only camped there once, but we just go and do the day trip there and hang out with other boaters.
I'll get
That's
your
great.
reservation. Just let me know, parent. I'll get your reservation.
Do you have pictures or could you describe what, because the word cabin can mean a lot of different
Yeah,
things.
so these rustic cabins are of a particular design. I don't know, Frank, if you've got a photo that you could I'll describe, if you could pull one up and maybe either of you guys, I don't have a computer here, but these are, the basic model is, what are they, 14? Help me with the dimensions, Frank.
Hello, folks. Frank Spalding, project manager. Find my unmute button. If it's okay with you, I can share my screen and show you what these cabins look like from our website photo gallery.
Please,
I'm
Frank.
allowed to do
They're
that. But essentially, they are a 14 by 14 foot interior structure with a 7 foot wide, 7 foot by 14 foot deck, and it's for a 21 by 14 foot overall structure. And there it is.
And they have inside, there's 4 walls, so they're closed. They have windows, they have a receptacle, they have a light, they have a futon, they have a bunk bed, table and chairs. Each one comes with like any campsite, with a picnic table and a fire ring. And they use the campground bath facilities. They are not plumbed. They're quite nice. And some of them, they're simple, but really sharp and extremely popular. Thank you, Frank.
That dripping sound that you hear is Senator Ingalls salivating at what the cost of one of those would be that he could sell and make a profit on.
I'm actually in the process of building one. It's 15 by 15 inside diameter, and it'll look a lot similar than that
That's
to that.
great.
So,
Very
yeah,
nice.
with the same idea. So, yep.
And so Senator Benning, I was basically saying, I think we came in with the request was there's this outstanding balance from 2019. You're right to say, what's with that? This is the special line in that appropriation for rustic cabins built with the career tech ed students. I say that because it explains why the money is where it is. They just generally don't have a lot of time. It's a slower process. COVID shut down, a bit of a mismatch with the cabin design and their normal construction trades approach, which we are fixing. So that would explain why it's been a while. I also just want to alert you that you would see in the capital bill, there's also subsequent years, the governor in 21 was it? He requested and you authorized $1 million for cabins not affiliated with the tech center. So that's we're all actually spending that money too, maybe even faster as we start to deploy that. But this is from a few years back. It was that special cabin program appropriation with the tech ed students. I'm explaining why it's still outstanding. And the House committee was indicating that they wanted to pull it back. And in a conversation like this, I think we got them to suggest that maybe ask us if we could do fewer cabins with that and take, so out of the 775 remaining, perhaps 250 or something could go to cabins, a fewer number of them. The balance, 500,000 say, would be used. We would spend that on parks infrastructure projects and just get that money spent. I think that's where we stand. Was there language in that originally that allowed the state to claw that back if it wasn't spent over given? No, but I think, Frank, we are asked every year to report on capital beyond 2 years, and I think that's your hook. But there was no special provision in that language that timed it out.
Okay, so they've cut you down
They are proposing to, I don't know if it's happened.
all right.
This was just last week, right, that we were in there talking about it.
What other capital?
We have
would
our-
you spend it on? What?
Oh, our infrastructure projects, everything from, we have these big broad categories that sort of make ongoing kind of small infrastructure projects, wastewater projects, water projects, and major infrastructure overhaul. So we are generally, you authorize a capital appropriation that's not a line item for us. It's more, here, go do your good work, tell us what you did. And we do it in these different categories around the state. This was a rarity of like a specific described appropriation for a purpose. And so what we would use it for would be that normal backlog of infrastructure work and, maintaining the park's infrastructure of underground wastewater systems, water systems, bathhouses, contact stations, maintenance shops. We have an array, pavilions. We have this array of built infrastructure in the parks that we need to maintain. That's what we would use it for.
Do you have wood stoves?
No, these are not. We're actually, Frank can speak more. We're thinking of a tweak to the design would be to allow them to be maybe, I don't know, insulated, potentially heated. You're kind of planning for that eventuality, thinking maybe we want to expand our sales season into the shoulder seasons, if not year round.
Yeah.
Why not have the cabins be ready for that? So that's something we've looked ahead to, and Frank's been leading that.
Yeah, you would be ambitious to make something like that winter worthy.
But shoulder
It's a
season.
shoulder season, yeah.
And I think people are showing real interest in wanting to be in the parks then, and that's another opportunity to get people out, generate revenues and all the good benefits that, just look what it did for Senator Parent.
Yeah.
Finding the
I'm a
park.
senator because of Woods Island.
Emerald Lake, look what happened to Senator Bennett, everything changed then. It wasn't the guitar, I'm pretty sure it was the park.
So we got $123+ million capital bill, and I suspect we're gonna be arguing about nickels and dimes after we get the bill over from the House, but I'm sure we can continue the conversation. I will warn you though, I'm looking to get a little bit of money for the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum in order to preserve one more wreck underwater. I figure it's only fair because somebody around here sank my project for diving last year with the.
We actually didn't sink it.
That's right. That's what we didn't do.
That's the kind of thing we'll be spending the next 2 months arguing over $123 million budget. Oh, well.
Couldn't even scuttle it here.
Yeah. Anything else you want to tell us this afternoon?
I think that's it for this round. No plans. We've done all our planning, so we're moving towards implementation, right? Senator Mazza, that's good.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
Do you have a map of where the new cabins are going, or?
What, Frank, I'm not sure if you heard that. It's, we have a map of where the new cabins would go. I don't know about a map, but.
Not a map, but like
I
a
know Frank
list.
can describe where can you run down the list of where plans for new cabins, please?
Yes, I can. The commissioner mentioned the $1 million that came in the last 2 fiscal years, 500 and 500. We actually, Quechee State Park was a park that was originally slated to get these tech center cabins. We had 6 cabin sites at Quechee alone. When we got the money separately that we were able to use for contracting it, we actually issued that contract, and they are currently under construction right now. So we have 6 going into Quechee. The 4 other parks identified for the big money, the $1 million, I'll just run down those really quick, are Lake Carmi, Branbury, and New Discovery State Parks, kind of the 4 regions of the state. Beyond that, the tech centers, we were looking at units of 1 and 2, kind of because of the limited nature of the tech center's capacity. And so we've identified Grand Isle State Park as a site for one of these cabins. In addition to other sites include Brighton, Elmore, Little River can always use more, and there's more down in Region 2, and in terms of Half Moon and Bombs, you can always use more cabins. I think our visitation or our occupancy percentage shows us that we can build them pretty much anywhere and have them be a success. So we were really trying to match up location with the tech centers. They have travel limitations. They have time of travel limitations. So we were trying to we tried to connect with Hartford and Randolph in terms of dealing with Quechee, but that's, Quechee is okay for Hartford, but not for Randolph. So we ended up using a contractor for those. But we're hopeful we can line these up.
But that's great. They're still going to Lake Karma. I know that, like I said, that's one of the ones I sold out, but
Yes.
would be interested too. I mean, on the islands, I mean, I always think Burton Island's gotta be your best kept secret
It's amazing.
of a state park, just people don't realize they can get out without a boat.
Yeah.
I don't even know if the community members know, but there's a state has a ferry that takes you out to an island if you don't have a boat.
Your committee, before you became a member of the committee, actually did a road trip on
Yeah.
that.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I was
That's
a
great.
island runner. It's great.
yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's a miracle.
I remember the old black boat. There was a black, before that, I remember the Island Runner was brand new, probably about 20 years ago now.
We do have, you may know Senator Parent since you're so familiar, but think about it. This is an island park. It's quite busy. We have international guests, it's day visitors, big boats. We've invested in a beautiful new marina there. We have what we call the landing craft. It is the lifeline for the park. So let's think about materials, firewood.
Yeah,
trash,
you got
trash
it.
away.
I see it there all the time right there with the
Right,
trucks.
so this is a Korean war vintage landing craft perhaps, maybe earlier, I'm not sure, and it's dead. This is a big ticket item. So that's on the capital list at some point. We have been contracting with the Green Mountains ferry boat, something, and that sank last year. It was resurrected, but so we are very vulnerable here. It's a great concern of mine that how do we operate that park without the landing craft? And at this point, we haven't been able to afford a new one.
What, I mean, obviously, those costs to look at, but I mean, I know the importance of that because your trucks out there were never the newest.
That's right.
Also too, I don't know, I haven't been out to Burton Island in a number of years, probably been about 5 years since I've been on the island, but we've always kind of let that old farmhouse run down there on the point there. Has there ever been plans to restore that or to do something with that? Because, you know, the story of St. Albans, I've been reading it, you can find it online, but the first inhabitant, Jesse Weldon of St. Albans, actually lived on Ball Island, is where he first went, and then they came right there through the islands. But people don't realize that less than 100 years ago, people were farming those islands as farms. And
No, is that the nature center building, or is there?
no, that's, you can see it from the lake, kind of when you're going between Mosquito and Burton, when you're going between the buoys, it's kind of like right in there.
Would either of you gentlemen be able to speak to the question? Great.
I have the story for that. Yes, that was called the Diamond Camp, DIMON, and that was we consulted with historic preservation and really looked at the potential future for that, and unfortunately reached the conclusion that it had to go away, and so that structure was removed. About the same time, we had to replace the electric line across the channel between the mainland and the island. So unfortunately, that was removed, Senator. And actually, what we have done since that time is constructed, I lose the number, 3 or 4 cabins of these rustic cabins around the corner from that diamond camp, and have returned that kind of camping opportunity to Burton Island. But unfortunately, the diamond camp was not part of that equation.
I see. That's now I remember, but that was before me, I think.
When was that built?
Oh, it was old. It was running down. I mean, it was a rundown vacant house when I was a kid go back. Has there ever been talk? So the lake's been getting shallower. I don't know. This is really not necessarily your place, but I assume in time, Lake Champlain will continue to become a shallower lake. They're getting between that channel between the islands is almost impossible for boaters come August.
And us too. And
so is there an opportunity? I mean, this is Army Corps engineers and others, but have you ever talked about dredging that channel more? Because that, I just know as a kid would be like only 3 feet.
Sandbar, you mean?
No, between Burton Island and Mosquito Island.
Oh, they talk about.
You gotta go
They talk
between
about
two buoys.
sandbar all the time. Sandbar all the time. That's shallow, but they can't. We try to dredge it 1,000 times. You can't get anywhere with water resources, those folks.
Yeah.
This has been dredged, hasn't it, Frank?
Yeah, so the Burton Island channel, you're talking about the causeway, or the former causeway that used to run between Mosquito Island and Burton Island. There's a cut through that causeway where there's actually directional buoys. We have actually surveyed that and developed an estimate, and I can't put hands on it right now, so I apologize for that, for deepening that channel. The problem is we don't own the state parks doesn't own the lake bed underneath the channel. And it's a pretty hefty price tag. I wish I could lay hands on it right now. I just can't. But we
Was
can
that
get
causeway man-made or is that a natural reef? I just know a lot of people lost lower units there over the years.
I don't know
I think
A
of that.
lot of cotter pins out there.
Yeah. Well, if you take the angle wrong on those buoys, you got a big rock right there by the green one.
So the structure that was taken down, was that from the 1800s?
I don't believe it was that old. It was a classic shoreline camp. I'd have to pull up the report that was done in order for us to remove that, to give you that answer, which we have.
Well, we need to investigate whether there's anything underground first before you rebuild.
Yeah, you should go out there and do your thing.
Oh, jeez.
Special for- I got a solution for your boat problem, though. There's an old ferry that you could probably throw a couple of big Evinrude outboards on it.
Oh, boy.
Go back and forth would be a classic Vermont solution to your problem.
I thought the landing craft was a classic Vermont solution, to be honest with you. It was quite a piece of work and really a valuable tool. They say we're vulnerable now.
Well, it would be kind of interesting to see a double-deck ferry boat.
Take Ingles' 90-foot boat. He'll drive you back and forth.
Yeah, there's probably at least one Russian yacht out there somewhere.
We might have to have a line item number on that, but yeah, I could do that.
I think we're going to continue this conversation when we finally get the Capitol bill and we know what we're talking about.
Right.
What year is that, Senator Benning?
Well, I don't know the answer to that, but I'm hoping I'm still going to be a state senator when it comes by.
You and Alice were together the other day. What the hell did you accomplish?
I just keep hearing the horror stories about she hasn't got it ready yet, and I'm getting a little nervous, to be honest.
God. I don't have the transportation bill either, so that's who.
There you go. Yeah, it could be problems.
They've only had it 3 months. Come on.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you again for coming by. We always love having you.
Thank you. We appreciate it. And we're happy to give you the quick heads up of what's cooking, and we'll be looking forward to coming back and straightening out whatever's needs straightening. Thank you.
Gotcha.
Thank you very much. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Great to see you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
We have one witness left to go, as I understand it. Trini Broussard is going to be coming to talk about something to do with the Vermont Agency of Transportation funding request.
She is hopping on the call right as we speak.
All right, this is at the request of Senator Parent. Trini, good afternoon.
Hey, Dick.
Hey, look at that. Now you got the top best right here from the agency. There you go. Don't give them any of our money over there, Trini. Now, come on. Don't give us our transportation money away.
So, Trini, welcome to Senate Institutions. I'm Joe Benning, the chair of the committee. I'm not sure you've ever actually been before this committee before.
No, we don't let her come over here. No, we stay on my side.
That was years ago.
Well, I'm going to back up a little bit just to give you some particulars about this committee. I try to make sure, I'm Joe Benning, first off, I'm the chair of the committee, and I've got a group of folks that I know you know at least two of them at this point. Corey is also here from Franklin County, so you probably have been coordinating with him as to your testimony this afternoon, or I suspect so. But the other person in the room is Senator McCormick from Windsor County, and you've got both Russ Ingles and Dick Mazza on the screen with you.
Oh, what's Corey pulling on? What's Corey pulling on me again?
Well, we're going to find that out in a moment.
Okay.
We have an unknown group of people out there in YouTube land. And what I try to do in the committee process is simply begin by having you introduce yourself, how you fit into state government, a little brief bio to let us know who you are. But for the folks who are on YouTube, we have no idea who they actually are and what they might be capable of understanding. So if I interrupt you anywhere along the way, it's only because I've red flagged some terminology that may be familiar to all of us, but may not be familiar to our YouTube audience. So with that, I'm going to say welcome to Senate Institutions. I'm anxious to hear about some conversation going on with respect to the Franklin County Field Days. And other things might pop up in that conversation that I understand could affect some of us around the state. But we'll see how far we can get with you. So Trini, welcome to Senate Institutions, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. So for the record, my name is Trini Broussard. I'm an assistant director with the Vermont Agency of Transportation. I've been in state government for 31 years, the majority of those with the Agency of Transportation. And currently I do the majority of my time with work in rail and aviation. So been around the block at the State House for years, mostly in front of Senator Mazza's committee in transportation.
Her and I have been together 31 years.
Well, it's at that point that I usually stop things and offer you my condolences. You might have worked with Rob Ide at one time?
Yep.
All
Yep.
right. How about Judy Wheelock? Do you know who Judy Wheelock is?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Good friend of mine.
Yep, goes back a ways.
Yep.
So today's topic is Franklin County Field Days, and dating back to the 80s, they moved their operation onto state airport land. And so when you look at state airport land, this is a defined number of acres that the state has said is aviation use, and the FAA allows us to lease it to somebody for a non-aviation use only until that point at which we need it for an aviation use. So in this case, there's what, 350, 360 acres up there. And we didn't have development in the area that they were using. So they've been able to hold the field days there. We've talked with them now for, I've been involved at least 10 years in conversations with them that the day was coming that somebody was going to need this land for an aviation purpose. And when that happened, they were going to need a new home. Well, the day has come, and we are working with 3 entities right now that have some pretty serious interest in developing there. And so we're, having the much more productive conversations with field days about needing to find a new location, get moved there, get set up there, and kind of try to move their way off the airport property, kind of looking in the 2 to 3 year time frame to make that happen. As we all know, it takes quite a bit of time to get through permitting and planning, all those functions that have to take place, not only for them, but somebody who wants to come onto the airport and construct and do some type of activity. So we started our meetings with them, looking at, kind of let's try and define what this looks like. What do you really need for acreage to do this? Is this a much bigger picture than just field days? Do we look at it as, if the public is going to be asked to help fund this, shouldn't it be something that's available year round for other activities and things that would generate more use and more folks coming into the community? So this discussion is in its early stages, but quickly went to who knows how to lay out facilities and activities for a field day event or any event, and how do you get the planning work done to decide what you really need versus what would be nice, and then how do you picture, kind of where does that go in 20 years, right? So you don't build for what you need today, you make sure you have space to expand, or you're going to be in the same boat again. So that's kind of where we're at. And the discussion was that they were going to need some level of funding to help pay for the planning initiative and kind of the scoping process of this, to then be able to evaluate properties that are in that county, and kind of come out with a preferred alternative. So
when you say they, The they we are talking about, is this a private enterprise?
It is not. Franklin County Field Days is a private nonprofit that basically hosts the Field Days event in that area. But the group that's at the table also involves the Regional Development Corporation, the Regional Planning Commission, some members of local municipalities, the Agency of Agriculture, Agency of Commerce, and V-Trans.
Where is it anticipated that, for instance, planning dollars might be brought into the picture? From what budget would we be talking about?
Well, our thought, it's up for us to decide. We appropriate money in the legislature, but our thought in talking with ag at the first meeting we held with the stakeholders is there. So Franklin County Field Days is not able to get some of the money that we appropriate for field days to build a structure now, because we all know they're not, we try to give it towards something that's gonna be around 20 years. We know Franklin County Field Days isn't going to be in its current location 20 years from now. So we were thinking that piece of our capital budget, potentially, increasing that line if we needed to. But ag, it would ultimately be ag dollars that would flow. But it's a project that helps out V-Trans, open up the airport. It clears a development hurdle too, because people aren't happy that Field Days has to move. That's the issue there, and any kind of expansion at the airport or any kind of development there's gonna have to go through Act 250, and if you have tractors, that becomes another issue. So I think trying to we give Field Days money now to build new buildings or to increase their infrastructure, and so we thought kind of to that same level of funding, change language that they'd be able to use it for planning purposes as well. And then they, go through ag to get the grant paid for through the capital fund.
Well, you know how we love giving planning dollars.
I know that's the worst thing I have to ask for, but.
Senator Mazza.
I thought Trini said that you've been aware of this for 3 years. Why hasn't anything been done in 3 years? Why did you wait? If you knew it was going to happen, I mean, it's something going to look forward to. I mean, you knew it was on airport property.
Yeah, I'm not on the Field Days board. I don't know what money they have available. They tell us none. But
what's the money planning for? Planning for what?
Well, I think the money is to help find, identify, talk about what they need at a facility, find the appropriate property, and ultimately help them begin the engineering of that property. And then, we'll have to figure out, they'll either have to acquire it, we'll have to figure out the acquisition. And then obviously they're gonna have to pay, or we'll help, hopefully maybe pay for the, the construction of the new facility.
Yeah, why not get the land purchase first? That's you can't.
We don't know how much land they need. And we don't know where they want sandy soil, they want it off a road that can handle the traffic. There's a lot of other issues that we thought as a group of volunteers, it might make more sense to bring an expert in who can focus on this and help them kind of get through that.
I would think it would be the board's decision to come up with some thoughts of what they want to do. I mean, all boards that I know of in the fairs, they do all the planning of what they want. I mean, I don't know how an outside person would help you any different than the board. The board is very familiar with what your needs are, I would think. I don't know.
I think there's a couple at play here, Senator Mazza. I think you've got a volunteer board that is so overwhelmed with what to do and how to do it and the order that they need somebody to help them organize even how to get their thoughts out and on paper. It's a much bigger issue for them than just picking a piece of land, because the land they have now, they've kind of, each time money was available, they plopped another building down. And now they're like, oh, I wish I'd put that over there instead. And so they kind of have an idea of how they might rearrange things if they had the opportunity. But no, I believe this is bigger than Field Days. And the reason I believe that is if it's going to cost us a lot of money to move them, and I don't know what the estimate's going to be, but they have quite a few buildings that are going to have to be reconstructed. It doesn't make sense for us to go out and beat the bushes looking for money to build a facility for a 3-day event. It does make sense for us to get some help looking at what the scope of this could be and how we could make this a venue that could host their event and other events for the region throughout the year. So, how do we get other things able to be held? And some of this was talking about, can you take a couple of the buildings they have there now and build one building instead of multiple buildings? And then that could be used to host different conferences or events, that type of thing. The benefit to the community economically, if this is a multi-event site throughout the year versus a one-time 3-day event, to me makes sense to go after that versus just looking at, is there a piece of land that we could move similar buildings onto for them for a few days?
So what's the total, what's the cost estimate to do something like this? We talk about planning and studying and what.
I think, I don't think we have to study much. I don't like the word study because it implies about a year. I think it's more of, do we get the right people around the table and start talking about what this looks like? I believe you could do that work in a few months if you really paid attention. The number 200,000 was kicked around, but that's not just for the study. That would be kind of what they would need or not the study, the plan. That's what they would need if they did a layout and identified parcels of land, did some preliminary environmental on those to see which ones would work, which ones wouldn't work, come down to one and negotiate a purchase and sales agreement.
So Trini, I'm curious, how did your division get pulled into this conversation?
We own the airport.
Okay.
You're not doing anything illegal. They knew they were on the airport property, right? So it's nothing,
Yep.
nothing we're responsible for.
They knew they were on the airport property. We've had this discussion many times over the years. We tried to push them into a, multi-year effort to kind of come up with what the plan was and take steps each year to kind of get to a new location. Again, I think it's such a big project and so overwhelming for a group of volunteers to undertake.
How many years have they got to get off there now?
I would say between 2 and 3.
2 and 3. So there's plenty of time to raise some money if they had to. I just wonder how many people would be interested in giving to something like that.
Senator Mazu, I am talking to a few farmers in the area who could potentially, if their property was chosen, talk about donating and other that. I think there will be support, but I think this initial money, people tend not to give to something unless they see pretty pictures of what it might look like and what the land might be and see a plan. I think this boost, in my mind, would be helpful. And I think where I do think the state has some ownership is we probably should have never let them put it there 40 years ago. I wasn't here to make that decision, none of us were. But once you let people start building buildings on property that you're going to take away from them at some point, we probably would have been better off saying you can host a temporary event here for a few years. But
And what results have you had in the House?
we haven't talked in the House. We just had this meeting over town meeting day week where this number came in. This is a fairly recent meeting. It's not something we've been sitting on for a while. We've known things were in the air, but we've never kind of had the next steps till, Trini and I and some others were talking about this. And I think of the people interested in the property, there's, one that I can imagine that seems to want to move very quickly. So I think people thought they probably had 5 or 10 more years when in reality we have those 3 years, 2 to 3 years. Because I remember when I was in the House, we had to move the Habitat for Humanity off the property and do some others. So I think this has been kind of a lingering thing for a while, but I think is really starting to come into focus here with the opportunities there.
So I know many fairs, which we do give money to, have various fundraising events. The most popular of which that I've dealt with on this committee has been demo derbies. You guys don't do anything like airplane derby demo. It would be a really unique opportunity to raise money in this state.
I don't think anyone want to pay to watch airplane crash.
I think the other thing he's been waiting for, Dick, is the Committee on Committees may eventually appoint him chair of this committee, so maybe he's got an angle that we haven't figured out yet.
Something going on, I don't know about.
No, in all honesty, it's a Hail Mary to try to find funding where we can find it. And help them move forward, because what I worry about is if we don't find anything this summer, if you got 2 years, if we wait to come back next year, you know, we're already a year behind the 8 ball, and if they don't have the money now, like they've got such a tight time frame. I'm not.
Yeah, but this should have been worked. This should have been worked on the last 2 months. If you got to get some consensus going on both sides of the aisle. I don't know how you're going to do it on one side. I don't know how. It's a brand new precedent you're setting if you start this.
No, I totally get it, but Trey can comment. We just had this meeting. What was it, March 3rd, where the 200,000 number was even thrown out. Yeah, March 3rd. So trying to move as quick as I can on this one. We've got other bills for this property we've been working on that are working their way through the legislature as well, including ag mitigation language, which the House has moved. But I know it hasn't moved here on the Senate side, but the House is moving it. And so hopefully we have that vehicle. So rock in a hard place, but I think it's something that benefits us all if we can figure out how to make this move. Not just Franklin County. I think the economic development implications are much broader than just one area and one airport.
But you are setting a precedent for all the fairs throughout the state.
Yeah, I hope we're not having to move too many more of them.
Well, I'm just saying, once you open that door, we got 14, 15 fairs around that we had. So that's why we have that fair grant program that every year allocates so much money to every fair. How much did Franklin County get this year for that?
None. I don't think, because they're not building any buildings. They're not allowed to get any of there's one grant they're not allowed to get money from because capital dollars have to go into long-term projects, and we know it's not long-term.
Well, you planted the seed for conversation, but I don't think I want to make any promises this particular year.
No, I get it.
Trini, anything else you need to tell us?
No, that's all my good news for today.
What's your bad news?
You don't want to hear it.
Well, we appreciate you coming by. There may be future opportunities for conversation, but it's a long way to go at this point. We are going to get a bill next week, probably, that really has much of the things we're talking about cast in concrete already, and I don't know how much sway we could pull this year. But the seat for conversation is there.
We pursued a couple of opportunities for planning grants that were not eligible for fairgrounds. So it's a tough niche to find funding for sure.
Right. Anybody else have any questions? Further comments? Trini, thank you very much for coming by.
Sure. Have a good afternoon.
Take
care,
care,
Senator Mazza.
Hi, see you later.
So I believe that's concluding our business for this afternoon. But committee, we're going to go offline first, and then we'll talk about logistics for tomorrow.